Hello everyone. Today we are continuing our discussion on casual speech. Last week we took a good amount of time to talk about when you use or don't use casual speech. So feel free to check out that video or the lesson in Renshu if you need a refresher on that. Today we're focusing just on past tense. Last week we did all the present tense versions of the various verbs, adjectives, nouns, and whatnot. Today we're switching over to past tense. And some of this is going to feel a bit new. Some of it will feel, hey, this is actually really easy. So I think today, compared to last week, will be a bit of an easier step. And yes, you should all have either you're watching the stream and you can see my Renshu window, or you've got it open in Discord. And again, feel free to ask questions whenever you want throughout the stream. Just type your question into the text channel, and I or someone else will be happy to answer. Let's get started. Okay, with the past tense forms, I'm just going to tell you the secret up ahead. I'm not even sure if it's mentioned in the lesson, but I'm going to tell you a secret. Remember that form that we learned so long ago that everyone groaned when they had to learn it for the first time? That's right, the te form. It's that one that has all these crazy spellings that weren't really present when we were talking about the mas form, mas or masen or masendeshita. All of a sudden te form just kind of jumped out of there, and the Japanese even needed to make a song to help people remember it because it's got all those crazy spelling rules. Hopefully by this point you feel more or less comfortable with that, and that's good because the past tense form that we're looking at today is actually the same as the te form with one minor change. So all the things that made the te form hard, you get to use all that knowledge now when you're dealing with the past tense. So that being said, I'm not going to talk about the te form anymore. I think you'll see the connection here. I'll mention it after, but let's take it as if we don't know the te form at all. So as usual, we're going to look at our three different categories of verbs. We've got our ichidan verbs, our godan verbs, and then our two special verbs, or technically three special verbs when it comes to the past tense. So let's see what we've got. We always start with the ichidan first, and we've got a few on the screen right now. And just in case you don't remember, let me ask you, what's that first verb mean? Okiru. To get up. There's one more meaning. Can anyone think of the second one? Oh, get up, wake up. Okay, I was putting those together. There's one more in addition to the rising out of bed. Yes, to occur, like an event occurs or an earthquake occurs. Right. What about that second verb on there, miru? This one's a bit more common. To see, to watch, to look at. Yeah, they all work depending on the context. And deru, that third one. It's again one of those verbs that based on the context can kind of change here and there. It's often leave, to go out, to exit, and again, but you've got the gist of it. And to make the past tense form, look at this. We just drop the ru because ichidan verbs we're always dropping that ru. We just don't need them. We just drop them and we add something else. And in this case, we're adding ta to the end of it. So we have okita, mita, and deta. And at this point, you might be thinking, wait, we just talked about te form a minute ago. And these kind of look like the te forms, don't they? And just in case you don't recall, I'll tell you that the te form of the first verb is okite, te form of the second is mite, and the third is dete. So we have the same thing going on here. It's just instead of te, we're adding ta. And that's all there is to it. The ichidan verbs are very simple. So with that, the te form trick isn't really helping you so much. But we'll see soon that with everything else, the te form is definitely going to give you a leg up with this. So here's our irregular verbs. We've got suru and kuru. And I will go ahead and mention Oh yeah, suru. What was the suru te form? Can anyone toss that out for me? Right. Shite. And for kuru? What about the second verb? As if you were to say, please come here. How would you conjugate the verb into the te form? Right. So we have shite and kite. And here we have shita and kita. So that te is getting replaced by the ta. That's basically it. There's one small little wrinkle in this rule, and you'll see it right here. So here's our Godan verbs. They're the ones that always involve the spelling change. And again, let's look at it. Let's look at what's going on. Now this page actually goes over all the different spellings. And so for the first one, if you have something that ends in an u, a tsu, or a ru, for example, tskal, which is right in front of us, motsu, to have, or kairu, to return home, then you're dropping that last character and you're adding the small tsu and the ta. So tskao becomes, I think it tells us, tskao becomes tskatta, motsu becomes motta, and kairu becomes kaita. But instead of learning these all from scratch, just look, hey, we were talking about the te becoming ta. The same thing is going on here. The te form of the first verb, skal, would be tskatte. Instead of tskatte, we have tskatta. Instead of motte, we have motta. Instead of kaite, we have kaita. So again, here's our rule. We've got all the te's we had before are becoming tas. The te becomes the ta. So what's happening with this next column? Because there's no te here. So real fast, before we read what's down below, does anyone remember what the te form version is of yasumu? So if you tell someone, oh, please rest, please take a break. And tskal is not necessarily a tool, it's just to use kind of anything. It doesn't have to be a tool. It's a very broad term. Thank you to the few people that answered. So yasunde kudasai. Right. So here's the second half of our rule. So if it's a te, we're swapping it out for a ta. If it's a de, look at that, we're doing the same thing. We're just holding on to the little ten. So the de becomes a da. So if we had yasumu, like what's on the screen, it would become yasunda. Asobu, to play, would be asonda. And shinu would be shinda. Everything else follows the same pattern. So the rule is put here, for your reference, but it's the same thing. If it ended in a te originally, you're putting ta instead. Kiku becomes kita. Kaku, which could be write. It could also be scratch or perspire, depending on which kanji you're using. Isogu. Now remember, isogu, the te form would be isoide, and so you're holding on to that, the ten, and it becomes isoida. Now I did mention that there were 3 special verbs, and that's our little friend iku. Now remember, the te form of iku is ite. So if you were saying, oh, please go to school, you might tell someone this. Gakko ni itte kudasai. And so we already had this rule in place, and so we're just falling back on our te-ta rule. So instead of ite, we have ita. And last, again, there's nothing new here. We are taking, the te that we had before, and we're switching into ta. So kesu would be keshite in the te form, keshita in the past tense. Dasu, which is to take out something, would be dashita. Now, that's a lot. That's a lot that we just went over. Hopefully, for a lot of you, you're thinking, okay, this makes sense because I've done this before. But nonetheless, let's practice a little bit. We've got time. Let's practice. Okay? We're going to do the same style of practice that we did just before the lesson started, before the recording started, which is I'm going to give you a verb, and please give me the past tense casual verb, the casual form. You know, the one that we just did. Okay? It might even be some of the ones that are on the screen. So we'll see. I'm going to type out the verb in the dictionary form on the screen. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 20 of you, as many as you want, please answer if you want to. Okay? Let's get started. Because it's closer to lunch than not for me, I'm going to start with taberu. And if it's taking you, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds to think this through, there's nothing wrong with that. Everyone starts there, starts at that point. And a big chunk of fluency is not the comprehension aspect, it is reusing the grammar or the spelling or the pronunciation, whatever it happens to be, so many times that time gets shorter and shorter. Shorter enough to where it doesn't become, a problem when you're speaking, when you're listening, when you're reading or writing. Okay, next word. Let's do, how about, oh no, I'll hold that one for later. Okay. How about if you line up, as in get in a line, or I lined up to wait for the store to open. Or what my son will be doing a lot in tomorrow's undokai, which is lining up, lines upon lines upon lines. Naranda, looking good. Okay, let's keep going. How about our to say verb? You. And just as a little bonus, when you're speaking more casually, especially when you're speaking, not so much when you're writing, but when you're speaking, there's another way to say this. Does anyone know? If you want to say, so-and-so said this, there's another way to say, instead of ita, you change one character. There's a casual form of the iu verb. Does anyone know what it is? Not quite. That is, in a sense, you're not wrong exactly, but there's another verb I'm thinking of. In fact, I'll give you a hint. It holds on to the conjugation. It holds on to the ta. It's just that first character that changes. And just in case the people typing don't get it, I'll give you one more hint. Try saying silently to yourself. Oh, someone got it. Okay. I guess no one needs to speak silently. It's you. This is this. You and you are the same in terms of meaning. You, the first one, it's used in casual conversation. And why is it used in casual conversation? Try saying, now this I want you to say, try saying you to yourself. You. Does it feel a bit hard to say that? Like to separate those two vowels out? Like to say you. It's not the easiest. It could be smoother. Now try saying you. That just rolls off the tongue. And so there's a lot of things in Japanese, in casual Japanese, that there's various contractions and whatnot that make it easier to say the word, especially when you're speaking quickly. So often you'll hear things like this. You'll hear yutta. which means they said. Or maybe you're asking someone, so what did they say? You'll even, instead of the te form, you'll hear it like this. And this is kind of jumping into another N4 level particle, the ending particle. That no actually marks a question. But if you're asking someone, hey, what are you saying? Like maybe they said something that you're not too crazy about. It's like, wait, what did you say? What are you trying to tell me? 何を言ってるの? Because it's harder to say. It's harder to get the E sound out of your mouth, and so you hear this a lot in casual speech. Okay, if you forget this, don't worry. It'll come back up. But if you hear it or see it in manga or anime or a drama, and you hear that U sound, they're actually using to say. They're just using a different form of it. Okay. Before we continue, I'd like to take our practice and step it up just a little bit. And the cha, it's not the easiest answer. One person gave most of the answer, but that's not all of it. And we can talk about it later if we have time. But what I'd like to do next is, we did this last week. Let's pretend that we're writing a journal, for example. We're writing a journal and we're saying something that we did today, or yesterday, or last week, whatever. It doesn't matter. But I'd like you to take these casual forms that we've used, and it can be a really simple sentence. It can be really simple. So you could say, you could say this. You could keep it as simple as possible. And you just say, I slept yesterday. 昨日は寝た. Or you can branch out a little bit. You can say, oh, this morning I ate curry. But I'd like as many people to try as possible. And it can be one sentence, it can be multiple, but try and get one sentence out about something you did recently. Now I'm going to step away for just a minute, but I look forward to seeing the sentences when I return. I'm back. I'm going to take a look at some of the sentences. And so let's see. Someone is talking about studying. And with studying, 勉強する, the past tense form is した. So 勉強した. Someone else is talking about waking up in the morning. Someone said that they bought Renshu Pro yesterday. Thank you so much. Someone saw a cat. Someone read several of something. I'm not quite sure if it was books or manga or magazines. But looking good, looking good. Someone went skiing in Hokkaido last year. That's cool. Okay, looking good so far. Now, we're going to step away from the verbs just a little bit and jump into a slightly different section, which is, remember that da thing we were talking about last time, where whenever we have a sentence, first we had so many sentences that ended with des. So many. And then last week we said, hey, most of the time you can end that with, well, no, it's not just da. It would end with da. And just because as you might remember, there's one key exception, which is with e adjectives. And we'll get to a page on that in a minute. You usually don't have a da on the end, just drop it off. But I'd like to point out that da, the casual verb, it's not really a verb, but we're going to call it a verb for now. The da becomes datta in the past tense form. Datta. It looks very similar to the way that we were conjugating the other verbs. It kind of feels like it's a part of the family. And so when will we use this? Now, these are very, very simple sentences, if you could even call them sentences. But typically, we're going to see datta coming after two things. And they're both on the screen. We're going to see them coming after nouns. Because before, we would say, for example, if I was telling you my name, I might say Michael desu. I'm Michael. And if I was being casual about it, which isn't something you usually do in a self-introduction, but let's just say I'd say Michael da. And if I was speaking about, maybe I changed my name. I said before I was Michael datta. So they come after nouns, and then they come after the na adjectives. So you could say, oh, I went to see the sunset yesterday. Kirei datta. Or I went to, this is true, a 30-second story. I moved out of Japan for a couple of years back to the US at the beginning of the pandemic. And during the pandemic, we had to fly out of Narita Airport. And Narita Airport is one of the biggest airports in the world. I mean, it's big. And there's so many flights to go out there, except during the pandemic. And it was so shizuka datta. It was so quiet that walking through the terminals, you couldn't see anyone in any direction for at least 100 meters. It was quiet. All the stores were closed. It was just waiting for zombies to pop out and start chasing after you. That's how it felt. Like they'd rented out the entire airport for a movie, for a chase scene. So when you've got your na adjectives, you can end those with datta. So nouns and na adjectives. With the e adjectives, it's a little different. So before we said, we're saying, oh, that's cute. We might say kawaii. But if we're saying something was cute, what happens is, if you want to think of it as a rule, you're dropping the I and you're adding katta. So something was kawaikatta. Oh, and sorry, maybe someone is typing to tell me this, but I left out an I in there. So something was kawaikatta, or the food was very oishikatta. Or yesterday was very atsukatta. I had to wear t-shirts in the short. It was very hot. Can anyone tell me what the past tense form of this guy would be? Good. It's maybe the one word that, yes, you see as single sentences in so many conversations. Yokatta. So someone asked about the na, and I'll take a second to talk about that. I always recommend that you never consider na part of the adjective itself. What I mean is that if we take the word kirei, I would not ever recommend learning it or thinking of it as kirei na. That is not the adjective. The adjective is kirei. Na is glue between the adjective and the noun. So it's something you're adding in certain situations. When you've got the adjective and then the noun following it, you need the na to hook them together. In other words, it's not standard for the adjective. So instead of thinking, do I need to drop the na or add the na, it's just, I like to think of it, and it's easier when you look at all the conjugations at once, the na is not even there. It's a na type adjective, but na is not part of it. So here, then when I see kirei, I don't think of myself as removing the na. I think of it as taking kirei and say, okay, I need to add da, or I need to add datta. So that helps me. Hopefully it helps you as well. Now, we're about to switch into the negative tense, negative past tense. And we talked about this about a bit last week, so some of you probably remember this. But we had things, for example, oh, this isn't very good. This isn't very delicious. Oishikunai. Question, do we already know how to make this into past tense? Excuse me. Do we know how to make this into past tense already? Yes. Both people said basically the same thing. Nai can be seen as an E adjective. You say, hey, there's an E on the end. And so all these things we just talked about the E adjectives, we use the same thing for everything that's negative. Absolutely everything. Everything, because nai, you see on E adjectives. So you see oishikunai. You can see it with na adjectives. Genki janai. And you can see with what you all typed out earlier, with nouns, ningen janai. They all have that nai on the end of them, which means it becomes nakatta. So this is, a very simple way of showing, oh, and now verbs, of course. Nouns become janakatta, na adjectives, janakatta, same one. E adjectives, you could think of it as kunakatta, but you just think you're switching that nai to nakatta. And then verbs, instead of saying tabenai, tabenakatta. So this is really just one rule. This is one rule that wraps into everything. If you've got that e on the end, that nai on the end, you're swapping it out for the nakatta or katta. Whichever way you prefer to look at it. Pretty cool. The page itself makes it look like, oh, there's so many rules here, but there's just one thing happening. It's just that e changing over to katta. So if you say that wasn't an apple, ringo janakatta. That wasn't very important. Taisetsu, or precious. Taisetsu janakatta. Or it wasn't warm. Attakaku nakatta. I didn't wake up. Okinakatta. Didn't play. Asoba nakatta. And I didn't come to the party or whatever. Konakatta. And yes, as someone pointed out, we threw that one in there. Let me jump back a bit because that's one of those tongue twisters. I promise your mouth will learn how to say that word. But it takes a while. Atatakaku nakatta. I kind of see it in my head, if this helps. It's not that you're breaking it up when you're speaking, but I kind of think of it as three chunks. Atatakaku nakatta. Atatakaku nakatta. And although this is kind of outside the scope of our lesson in terms of difficulty, I'll mention there is one more casual form of this because Japanese people probably aren't too crazy about saying this as well. Atatakaku nakatta. There's so much in there. So what do? I'm going to break it up again so you can see it. They do this. They take those first two tas. Like, why are there two tas? Oh, and Kala-chan's getting in the way. Let me repaste that just so it's back at the bottom of the chat. They take those two tas and they kind of just glob them together. So instead of atatakaku nakatta, they say atakaku nakatta. Atakaku nakatta. It's a bit easier. It still may seem hard, but it is a step in the right direction, and it does help somewhat. It's harder for you. Oh no. Well, you can't go wrong with either of them. They both work. I want to say that it will become easier later on. I think what happens is it becomes a necessity when you start to speak faster. It's really hard to say atatakaku nakatta, atatakaku nakatta, atatakaku nakatta, when you're trying to just get it out as quickly as you can, which is how a lot of native conversations are. There's a lot of speed to it. Atakaku nakatta. Anyway, don't feel pressure if you can't get that yet. Just I want to throw that out so if you see that in the future, you think, oh, that's where that's coming from. What normal speaking speeds? There is no normal speaking speed. It depends on the person. Think about your native language. I'm guessing most of you are native English speakers, but some of you have that English as a second language. And I know a lot of Japanese people, and they all speak at different speeds. It might depend on who they're talking to. I'd say casual tends to be faster than polite forms. People tend to speak more quickly. They're not quite as concerned with getting every character pronounced correctly. But what's normal? I'm not sure. Like I can tell you if I was speaking, for me, this is me. The person I speak to most in Japanese is my wife. I don't really speak to my kids in Japanese. I use English with them. But if I was speaking to my wife, we're as close as you can get in terms of relationship because we're married. And I'm trying to think of something we talked about yesterday. Oh, I have to go pick up my son today. And so I might say, 今日はリオはいつだっけ1時10分に学校終わるから、その頃に行けば大丈夫かな。ちょっと時間かかるから1時20分かなまでに行けば大丈夫でしょ。So, even what I was speaking just now, there were points where I slowed down and sped up, but that's a speed that would be common at the faster ends. But you hear other people speak, and they speak much more slowly. And it might be that they speak with more emphasis, or compared to other people, I speak with less filler. I don't mean this in a good or bad way. It's not me trying to be better. But Japanese, like all languages, has filler. For example, it's sa. It's got that sa. 昨日はさ、あれ、やばくない？よく食べたけどさ、なんかね、I don't sa like Japanese people do. It just never became part of the way I speak. And so a lot of Japanese speaking, I think, especially among younger people, but even among adults, there's a lot more breaking up because they speak in a more broken way, in the way that native speakers often do of any language. I That's a really good question. Oh, and let me answer that in just a few minutes because we're so close to the end of the lesson. I mean, we're basically done. But I wanted to make sure we don't have any questions about what we did today. And let's practice for a few minutes, and then we'll come back to the speaking topic. We can talk about that towards the end. We talked about negative past tense. So one more time, let's. We talked about actions before, so let's step away from that. Let's use adjectives a bit, and let's think about something. And I'm going to give you some topics to talk about. Weather, food, TV, movie. Talk about one of those. Say something that you saw, ate, experienced recently, and tell me how it was. So I'll give you an example. And since it's an English show, I'm going to write the name of it. But the Amazon Prime show, Fallout? Fallout は面白かった. It was interesting. You could tell me about the food yesterday was good or bad, or the weather was hot yesterday, or it was windy, it was cold, or this music was really good. But think of something that you've seen or experienced recently and tell me how it was. And to the person, the video should be available today. I usually get them up within an hour, but in my speaking earlier, I mentioned that I have to pick my son up early today because we have the Undokai tomorrow, which means school ends early today. And that means my work day is kind of a mess. So I'll get it up if I can, but we'll see. So someone said Batman was interesting. The curry was spicy. Karakatta. What else? What is something? And if you can't think of anything else, keep it simple. Everyone eats. Tell us, what you ate and say it was good, it was bad, it was yummy, it was sweet. I see several people typing, so I'll give you another minute before we wrap things up. And again, feel free to ask questions. We are wrapping things up, but if you've got a question you want to jump uh, jump in and ask, now's the time to do it. Okay. A couple of people are talking about slightly more complex topics. I'm going to leave that there. Thank you, everyone, for joining our lesson. And yes, as I said, this will be available inside Discord and inside the Renshu app. If you don't know where it is, it's usually if you go to resources and then Japanese lessons, all these little icons, the movie icons. These are all the lessons we've done so far. And so it will appear right here when it's ready. And one more thing. I did want to mention this. We have been talking about practicing the conjugation. And we do have conjugation schedules available. I already have, you can see the verb conjugations and adjective conjugations. I have mine here. If you don't have these on your desktop and you want to add them, here's what you want to do. Is go to manage your schedules, which is below the schedule that you already have. And then it's not going to be under my schedules, so the ones you have now. Go to all schedules. And then under Renshu recommended, it's right here at the bottom. You can add them. And then once you add them, you are able to go in and say which conjugations you want to focus on. So I hope that helps. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.